This is Ceiling Catapult. It's one of the 60 single-player levels in Portal 2. You probably know the game for its challenging puzzles or charming nature, but in some circles, the game has a completely different reputation. Since the game's release in 2011, speedrunners have completely dismantled the game's chambers, using insane techniques and glitches to squeeze every possible millisecond out of their world record speedruns. But of course, it doesn't happen overnight. Speedrunners spend years upon years discovering some of the fastest strategies, and nothing compares to the ingenuity of the Ceiling Catapult speedrun. This is the story of Ceiling Catapult. First, let's take a look at the actual chamber. Ceiling Catapult is the first level of Chapter 3, The Return. Chapter 1 involves a lot of simple levels with the single portal gun, and then Chapter 2's puzzles are still fairly elementary, as the player gets adjusted to the dual portal gun. Chapter 3 is where the puzzles really start picking up in difficulty. The chamber starts out by exiting the elevator into a somewhat long corridor, and then into the lower part of the chamber with a faith plate. After hitting the faith plate, the player falls just short of reaching the portal surface on the ceiling, and GLaDOS talks at the player for about 10 seconds. After that, the player steps on the faith plate again, and still fails to reach the portal surface. GLaDOS talks a bit more, calling Chell fat.
I'll add a few zeros to the maximum weight. You look great, by the way. Very healthy.
And then lets the player launch again. And after falling short for a third time, GLaDOS lowers the ceiling. Now with access to a portal surface, here's where the chamber actually starts. The level itself has 4 major components. A button on a raised surface that activates a cube dropper opposite of the button that drops a laser cube when activated, the ending door, which is also raised much higher than the floor of the chamber, and a laser and laser receiver that are separated by this portalable wall. To solve the chamber, the player is intended to reuse the aerial faith plate at the start of the chamber, and by placing their other portal on the provided slanted panels, they can fling to the necessary elements of the puzzle, like the button and the cube dropper. You can then bring the cube back down to the floor of the chamber, aim it at the portalable wall, and then use the last slanted surface to fling up to the elevated part of the chamber. Once up there, you can shoot portals on the wall in the center of the chamber to connect the laser to the laser receiver, opening the door and solving the chamber. It's not too bad once you figure out you can reuse the aerial faith plate at the beginning. So now that we know how you're supposed to do the chamber, let's see the speedrunning community's first attempt at breaking it. The first recorded world record was a 117.76 by Bananasaurus Rex. He starts the run by bunny hopping out of the elevator and hitting the faith plate as soon as possible. Then, he does almost nothing for about 45 seconds, as he listens to GLaDOS talk. The only thing worth noting here is that he takes the time to cleverly shoot a portal onto the wall in the middle portal island, which he will use to fling through later. Once the ceiling lowers and the faith plate finally reactivates, he launches into the chamber, and sets up his portals right below the button and the cube dropper. He then jumps off of a slanted panel, hits the button in mid-air, and then performs a reportal glitch while going through the orange portal. A reportal is a glitch that abuses the portal push mechanic. If you shoot a portal while standing in a portal, you'll get a 200 velocity push out of the portal, as the game doesn't want you to stand in a portal to get better angles on portal shots. A reportal abuses this push to clear gaps, or in the case of Ceiling Catapult, to get more height. You can use the speed boost to reach right above the glass blocking the cube dropper, and grab the cube as it falls. It's also worth noting that this trick is made easier by not letting the platform below the button spawn in, which is done by using a look trigger. So as long as you don't look at the button when you first enter the chamber, the platform will stay down. The trick is still possible with the platform up, but it's slightly easier without it. Now with the laser cube in hand, B-Rex aims it at the portalable wall, and then portals over to the slanted surface near the end. By jumping off of the slanted surface, he is able to build up enough momentum to land on the upper part of the chamber. Then, using portals, B-Rex connects the laser to the receiver, activating the door and finishing the level. Clocking in at 117.76, This was a pretty solid time to start off our story. This run was completed in 2011, the same year as the game's release, so runs were still fairly undeveloped. But Bananasaurus Rex was the best runner at the time, and it shows, as his run was nearly 6 seconds ahead from the second place time, truly in a league of its own. But through this first run, we can already see the problem with the chamber. The obscene amount of waiting at the start of the level makes it incredibly unfun to speedrun. The chamber itself is actually quite cool and flashy, but you have to wait for almost a minute until you actually get to play it. This made the level super tedious for runners to grind. So between speedrunners finding the chamber boring and Bananasaurus Rex's time being very strong, his record would remain uncontested for quite a bit. It wasn't until August of 2012 where Pocky would improve the time below the 117 mark, with a time of 116.98. Pocky shaved off a bit of time with less hesitation when performing the big reportal trick and also aiming the laser cube. But the run was still very clearly flawed, as he took 3 tries to shoot the laser portal and jumped right into the side of the staircase at the end. A runner named Jijez would quickly improve the record by 1.5 seconds. This 1:15.53 time was very similar to the previous record, but actually nailed the ending. However, Jijez was very displeased with this run, commenting, "All I can say is that you can F up everywhere here. 113 is possible, but I'm not skilled to get this time." Another runner commented on Jijez's run, saying, "I am more impressed by the amount of patience it would have taken to do this than the run itself." While speedrunners saw room for improvement, almost no one wanted to grind out Ceiling Catapult due to the long wait at the start, which is why the community was shocked when Jijez improved the record not to a 114 or even his goal of a 113, but all the way down to a 100.50. Just how exactly did Jijez cut 15 seconds off of the record?
There, try it now. You seem to have defeated it.
It looks like just a normal ride on the faith plate, but Jijez completely skipped one of GLaDOS' lines, which let him get into the chamber nearly 17 seconds sooner. A well-timed crouch while in air somehow resulted in a dialogue skip, which not only saves time on the speedrun, but cuts down on the infuriating amount of waiting. The biggest problem was that not many understood how the trick worked, and found it very inconsistent. But there was a small inkling of an idea that if you were able to skip one line of dialogue, you could probably skip 2, such that you only needed to ride the faith plate 1 time. But runners could barely understand how to get this first dialogue skip to work, so many got frustrated by the trick and refused to run the chamber. It would take 2 months for a runner to finally get a cleaner run with the trick, where in October of 2012, a runner named Jesus Catface was able to snag the record by 1 second, and get the first time under a minute on Ceiling Catapult, with a 59.66. This record would stand uncontested for a couple months, and as time passed, runners started to dissect the dialogue skip, and with understanding came improvement, and then mastery.
Hey, it's me! I'm okay!
You seem to have defeated it.
The double dialogue skip bypasses both of GLaDOS' lines of dialogue, so GLaDOS instantly lowers the ceiling after one ride on the aerial faith plate. This allows the player to enter the chamber at around 30 seconds, saving nearly 29 seconds over the normal way. The most bizarre part of this skip is that when you look at it in full speed, most viewers wouldn't even recognize a massive skip occurring, as just 2 precise inputs save almost 30 seconds. We found out that the game counts how many times the player has used the faith plate by this big yellow trigger block in the air. Every time the player enters the invisible trigger, it increases the internal count by 1, and when the count hits 3, GLaDOS will lower the ceiling. The skip simply uses a well-timed crouch and uncrouch to hit the trigger multiple times. On the way up, the player crouches right after hitting the trigger, which will shrink the player's hitbox, allowing them to enter the invisible block a second time. And then on the way down, the same concept applies, just instead of crouching, the player uncrouches after leaving the trigger, which expands their hitbox to barely tag it for a third time. This sets the internal count to 3, so GLaDOS instantly skips to her third line of dialogue and lowers the ceiling. This was a monumental discovery for Ceiling Catapult, as not only did this cut a ton of time off of the speedrun, but it saved runners from the most dreadful part of the level, the waiting at the start. Following this discovery, a flurry of world records were set on the chamber, most of which have been lost to time. So let's look at the first double dialogue skip world record that has video, a 45.60 set by Yarby in July of 2013. It was a fairly clean run that nailed the double dialogue skip and the ending, but was a little slow in getting and aiming the laser cube. Yarby proclaimed that a 43 would be possible, which seemed like a bit of a stretch, but it was clear the time could go lower. Around this time, runners started to investigate faster ways to do the end of the chamber. A runner named iVerb found a peculiar glitch with the debris on the floor of the chamber, where going through a portal with debris would give the player a massive boost, which could be used to fling to the end without the slanted portal. This ended up not being viable because it takes a fair amount of setup time. Martin found a different way to do the ending where you would use the slanted portal, but instead of climbing the slanted portal surface to gain height, you would combine a bunny hop through a floor portal plus a re-portal to get enough speed to reach the ending of the chamber. This ended up saving a bit over a second. With this new route improvement, Yarby would return to the chamber 4 months later to improve his record. With a time of 44.51, Ceiling Catapult was now under 45 seconds, and this really marked the start of a new era for the chamber, as it seemed the level was solved from a speedrunner's perspective, and for the next year, execution would be what separated the top runs. Xenernicus, who usually specialized in the full game speedrun of Portal 2, took his talents to the individual level runs, and managed to snag the world record from Yarby by a few tenths of a second. This record would be incredibly short-lived though, as within a mere 20 hours, Yarby would convincingly take the record back with a 43.45. Later into 2014, Yarby would truly flex his skills by achieving a 42.96, just barely under 43 seconds. This was a really solid run. It used a micro-optimization where runners would start aiming the laser at an angle so they would spend less time walking after getting the cube. But also, runners were generally improving in their movement. But no one was better at movement than Xipe. Xipe was undoubtedly the best Portal 2 player at the time, and it seemed inevitable that he would contest the Ceiling Catapult world record. A week after Yarby's excellent sub-43 time, Xipe would crush it by half of a second, at 42.48, which is an unbelievable time that I would love to praise, but unfortunately its video recording has been lost to time. Regardless, Xipe was on such another level when it came to execution that it would take 2 years for this run to be beaten, all the way in 2016, where a small route improvement was found in the chamber. A router named Tanger2B discovered a really clever application of the Pika Portal glitch that allows the player to carry momentum from the initial Faith Plate ride into the chamber. It works because the player's camera is different from the player's actual core position. The player's camera, where portals are shot from, is located in the player's head, while the player's position is located closer to their chest. Since we're going through a ceiling portal, our head will go through first, and this creates a small delay between when our camera goes through the portal and when our position does. If you shoot a portal during this time, you can redirect where your actual position comes out from. This route gives you a little more height than the prior reportal strat, so you would have to bonk your head on the cube dropper in order to grab the cube. When done properly, it saves a little more than half a second. AJ was the first runner to use this strat, barely beating Xipe's run with a time of 42.41. But a month later, Xipe would utilize the new route himself, and get a couple of runs ultimately ending at a 41.83. A new strat, but the same outcome. Xipe nearly half a second ahead of everyone else, setting a dominant time that would go uncontested for years. It took a special character to best Xipe's time. That character, Swagatron, had a very interesting role as a top Portal 2 speedrunner, as he would often appear out of nowhere, get a world record time, usually using a new route or optimization, and then once he was satisfied with his time, he would take a break from that chamber and never really fight to keep his world record status. In 2019, he would work his magic on Ceiling Catapult, using one of the most insane route improvements. That was a bunny hop into a reportal, then aiming portals to fling through the slanted surface, and then barely weaving in a portal shot to connect the laser. I mean, look at how tight this shot is. All of that would save a little under half of a second. While one might expect this fling should be much faster, because we have to go slightly back towards the chamber to climb the stairs, it ends up saving much less time than if we could just fling directly into the door. Swagatron would use this strat to beat Xipe's 3-year-old time, ultimately achieving a 41.58, a quarter of a second improvement. However, Xipe did not care for these silly route improvements, and 2 months later, he proved that he was one of the best Portal 2 speedrunners by beating Swagatron's time without the new ending strat. In a near-perfect speedrun, Xipe was able to place himself 3/100ths ahead of Swagatron, barely getting the world record with a time of 41.55. Route improvements seemed to come and go, but Xipe's status as the Ceiling Catapult world record holder seemed unavoidable. Swagatron did not show any interest in returning to Ceiling Catapult, and no other runners ever tried to pull off his improved ending, as many deemed it too difficult or not worth it. This trick was right at the end of the run, and as much as we did cut off a ton of waiting time with the double dialogue skip, you still had to wait nearly 30 seconds to actually enter the chamber, so it was very annoying to grind out. So even though Xipe's run was beatable with this strat, it seemed like it would stay on top for a long, long time. It's November 20th, 2019, and we're in the Portal 2 Speedrun Discord server, where accomplishments are shared, obscure memes are created, and random speedrunning rules are argued upon. Local big brain and triple laser enthusiast Kurzyhow has a random shower thought before going to bed, and it's on the map Ceiling Catapult. There's a large piece of debris that's hanging from the ceiling near the start of the chamber, and with some really good air strafing, you can sort of bounce off of the intended trajectory of the faith plate and land on this hanging debris. Kurzyhow wanted to investigate if you could somehow get from this piece of debris to the actual chamber. At first glance, the gap seemed far too big to clear, and you didn't really have enough space to build up speed with bunny hops. It was thought that maybe you could use the nearby observation room to bunny hop off of, as you can jump on the edge of the glass, but there was this big obtrusion sticking down from the ceiling that the player would hit their head on if they tried to perform this bunny hop sequence. A bit of math later, Kurzyhow determined that the skip is probably possible for a tool-assisted speedrun, so the next day, a tasser, Blenderist, quickly threw together a TAS, and yeah, with superhuman air strafing, it was possible to completely skip GLaDOS lowering the ceiling and make it right into the chamber. However, the amount of speed that the TAS generates from jumping off of the observatory room and the timing at which it does so is just not possible by a human. So unfortunately, unless there was another platform or thing we could jump off of, the skip was not humanly possible. Ceiling skip. It's all made possible because of an unintentional, super tiny ledge on the edge of the observation room, which you can jump off of with barely enough speed to reach the chamber. You also barely make it underneath the overhang in the ceiling. Overnight, competition for Ceiling Catapult completely exploded, with some runners now proclaiming that the new hardest route in the game was found. The skip is quite challenging, because the strafe onto the debris was very tricky, and the jump on the edge of the observation room is absurdly precise. Spida was the first runner to improve the world record with ceiling skip, getting a time of 37.93 on the day of the trick's discovery. But there are some important details about the trick that should be noted. The first is that after we get on top of the hanging debris, we do have to wait for about 5 seconds before attempting the jump. as you had to wait for these panels to fall down. Secondly, since we don't have access to the aerial faithplate, we can't do the Pika portal, so we have to revert back to the older reportal route. Lastly, and the most important detail, is about the stairs at the end. The ending door is elevated above ground, and there are stairs that we can use to get up to the ending door. However, these stairs do not rise until around the 35-second mark. This is not a problem if you play the chamber normally, as you're still waiting for GLaDOS to lower the ceiling at the start. Even with the double dialogue skip, you're still in the puzzle when the stairs are raised. But with the ceiling skip, it's possible to completely finish the chamber before these stairs have lifted from the ground. Essentially, speedrunners had solved the chamber's speedrun route. You had to get to the elevated door to finish the level, and you couldn't get to the elevated door without the stairs, and the stairs always turn on at the same time, and speedrunners could beat the level faster than it took for the stairs to spring up. So even if you could do the puzzle faster, it wouldn't matter. You would still have to wait for the stairs, and the only thing that would differentiate your final time is how long it took you to jump into the flags at the end of the level. From 2019 to 2021, speedrunners would fight over milliseconds, as the chamber reached its limit. Zanera got the first solid world record with a time of 36.16, Rex followed 6 months later with a 36.15, Zanera clapped back with a 36.11, Xipe butted back in to reclaim his throne with a 36.09, and then 6 more months later, Rex would squeeze out another 100th of a second to get a 36.08, which seemed like the speedrunner's final solution to Ceiling Catapult. This time would go on to be tied by 4 other runners, reinforcing the fact that 36.08 seemed like the best possible time. The route was hard to pull off, but once it was completed somewhat fast, it basically guaranteed a time within 0.1 seconds of the world record. There was something beautiful in the fact that what once was such a competitive speedrun level had basically become capped, as once you got a good run with Ceiling Skip, there was no reason to play the chamber again, unless you were one of the crazy few who wanted to see who could jump into a door the fastest. The best speedrunners could complete Ceiling Catapult well before that 35-second mark, but they would have to wait for the stairs to rise. So with no faster way to complete the chamber, Ceiling Catapult is solved. Wait, did you really think that speedrunners would be stopped by a single set of stairs? This is the stair skip, the true final solution to Ceiling Catapult, which uncaps the chamber and allows runners to beat it faster than 36 seconds. While Iverb found the debris boost all the way back in 2013, it wouldn't be until 2022 where it was found to be faster for speedruns. The stair skip uses the debris boost to get a large amount of momentum, and with a precise portal placement and angle, you can fling right into the door frame, effectively skipping the need to use the stairs to complete the level. This was a groundbreaking discovery, because now the chamber was no longer capped by the stairs at the end, so competition was once again lively for Ceiling Catapult. At least, it should have been, but this strat was really hard. For starters, you had to do the ceiling skip, which only 30 or so runners have ever gotten a run with. Then, for the stair skip itself, you had to get the debris boost, which is quite finicky, and then aim this portal while in air. The angle and position of this portal is super precise. A couple degrees too shallow, you go to the right of the doorframe, and a couple degrees too steep, you end up on the left of the doorframe. Then, you have to shoot the laser portals in air while you're flying towards the door. This isn't as precise as Swagatron's route, because you have more height and airtime, but it is still very challenging to aim the portals and get them to line up in one try while you're in the air. All of this combines for one of the hardest skips in Portal 2. Unity was the founder of the stair skip. He was inspired to find a better route for the chamber after frustratingly trying to beat the tied world record time. He first shared ideas of the skip on January 12th, and then spent the following 3 days painstakingly labbing out the chamber to make the strat feasible. He actually first concluded that the route was slower, getting a successful stair skip run that resulted in a 37-second time. However, with a bit of persistence, he was able to get the first world record with the route by getting a time of 35.50. It's worth noting that because completing the chamber quickly actually matters now, speedrunners will replace jumping off of a slanted portal surface with a reportal. This results in a super flashy double reportal route to get the cube. Unity would improve the record all the way down to a 32.78, and this time basically stood in a league of its own, as it was 3 seconds ahead of any competition, and most runners thought that stair skip was too difficult to perform. Unity's record would stand for almost all of 2022, until October, where Royal managed to beat the time by 0.05 of a second, and a month later, Angry Sneck would nail an insane run on the chamber, cutting the world record all the way down to a 32.45. This nails all of the hard tricks in ceiling skip and stair skip, but also has great execution throughout the run, and this is where the record stands today. The full route for Ceiling Catapult is now one of the hardest speedrun strats in the game, with only 6 runners having full runs with ceiling skip and stair skip. The chamber has come a long way, starting with a 1-minute long waiting period in the level, to speedrunners proclaiming that the level has been solved, and then eventually breaking through with one of the coolest speedrun routes in the game. It goes to show you that you should never bet against speedrunners' ingenuity and the solutions that they create. And sometimes, it's always good to double check your work, as you never know when a problem is truly solved. Thanks for watching.